Ladies and gentlemen, Erev Tov, good evening, or good afternoon to those of you watching on Zoom in North America. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Begin Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to another of our English events. Some of you are regulars here and know that we are currently in the midst of a very interesting series on the prime ministers, where every couple of weeks we have an expert come in to talk about a particular prime minister. For those of you who want to join us for that, we have Menachem Begin, in fact, on this coming Sunday. So come for that. The last prime minister we discussed was Yitzhak Rabin, which of course led to discussions about also the peace process and other things. And it actually coincided with me reading some of Aryeh's book in preparation for this event. And it struck me that today, the only people really talking about peace in the Middle East or peace with regard to Israel are not really people inside Israel, people outside Israel who are talking about the kind of peace that I think the vast majority of Israelis today, post-October 7th, wouldn't countenance, because it requires us to take the sort of risks that I think most Israelis are just not willing to take at this point. So what I'm really indebted to Aryeh for is in writing a book that opens a conversation about peace that is not part of that old paradigm. And I think Aryeh would agree with me. When he comes up, he can disagree with me if he wants, but I think he'd agree with me that it's not, you can read the book and not necessarily agree with everything he's putting forward, but appreciate the fact that he is opening the conversation and inviting us to engage with these ideas, to challenge them if we want, to accept some of them if we want, and also that when he and I talked about this event, he very specifically wanted it to be an event where there was a conversation with other people about the ideas, not just him being interviewed about the book, as is often the case with these things, but rather that it's a conversation about the ideas that he's putting forward, including perhaps challenges to those ideas. And I really respect that and appreciate that. So thank you, Aryeh. So Aryeh Green, I'm going to introduce him. He's going to take us from here. He's the author of this new book, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, which is proposing a radical new approach to resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict. He also wrote, prior to that, My Israel Trail, which is about his hike on the 700-mile Israel Trail and overcoming personal challenges. He serves as Chief Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global, developing renewable energy projects in Africa. It's based in Jerusalem, and is co-founder of its US nonprofit affiliate, Gigawatt Impact. Aryeh also serves on the board of Jerusalem's Malay Film School, the only Jewish film school in the world, and of Israeli Cool, a leading online Israel advocacy platform, and other nonprofits. He has in the past, and was when I first met him many years ago, a policy advisor to Natan Sharansky, and a business executive and consultant for the past 4 decades. He's been active in promoting freedom and democracy in the Middle East and supporting Israel's public diplomacy, including serving as a briefing officer in the IDF's spokesman's unit. He's originally from Washington, D.C., has lived here in Israel for over 40 years. Aryeh Green.
Wow, I'm not sure if that introduction wasn't almost too long. Okay. Thank you, Paul. But we've known each other for 20 years or so, and I just want to say a personal thank you to you for helping to facilitate this evening. I want to thank you all for coming, including those of you online joining us on Zoom. I very much appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules, even on a Sunday evening at Yeshiva, to come and talk about what is an important topic for all of us, and yet, as Paul, you mentioned, isn't really talked about a lot these days because of the situation we've been in the last number of years, which is, of course, peace, not just in terms of Arabs and Israelis, but Muslims and Jews and Christians in the West and others. So thank you for being here, and a few other quick thank yous. And one is to all of you and other friends and family who've supported me in this effort over the last decade. And definitely want to thank both my editor, my biggest critic, and my Ezer Kenegdo, which is mostly on the Ezer side, Miriam. Any sentence that is less than 2 lines long, you can thank Miriam for in the book. So before we get started, I do want to make a few kind of introductory comments, but let me set the stage for how the evening is going to go, because Paul said very correctly, I didn't want to stand here and give an hour's lecture reviewing all the points of the book, because first of all, I'm happy for you to read the book. And second of all, I think that it's much more interesting to have a dialogue with people who have their own perspectives on these issues. And as we said, specifically perhaps disagreeing with some of the points that I might have made. But I do think some comments of an introductory nature are appropriate. So first of all, I'm actually quite pleased that we're holding the launch here at the Begin Center, because I think that irrespective of your politics or politics in the past, there's no question that we can all recognize that Menachem Begin was one of the first and one of the strongest advocates for peace in our region, and particularly an advocate of courage with a great amount of humility and a real sense of purpose. And specifically, he was outspoken against the efforts to deny history or to deny our identity. And therefore, having this event at the Begin Center, I think, is incredibly fitting. And similarly, when Paul and I were trying to find the right date to hold this event, which originally was scheduled in, I believe we talked about April when the war broke out and what have you, and this was the date that was available, I was a bit hesitant because we're in the week that Tisha B'Av falls, and therefore I couldn't bring my homemade wine to share with you. You're all welcome to come to my home in Beit Shemesh and sit on the balcony watching the sunset to drink our homemade wine. But this week, according to Ashkenazi custom at least, we don't drink wine, and so I wasn't able to do that. And I also wasn't sure it was really appropriate to have a celebratory sort of book launch. But in the end, I feel that there's a great appropriateness to it, even though I had to shave for the first time in about 2.5 weeks, which is not normally my custom, but I felt to honor the event was appropriate. As a sign of our mourning, many of us who are traditional in our observance don't shave as we lead up to the 9th of which commemorates the destruction of the 2 temples and the loss of our sovereignty here in our ancestral homeland. Why is that appropriate? Well, there's a legend that Napoleon was walking past a synagogue on Tisha B'Av once, and he heard crying. And when told that the Jews were mourning a temple destroyed almost 2,000 years earlier, he supposedly said, any people who can still mourn for their land and their temple after so many centuries will surely merit seeing them rebuilt. Now, that may be apocryphal, but it tells an important story, and the stories we tell about ourselves are just as important as any historical accuracy of this sort of a story. And that is the reality, the factual nature of the connection of the people of Israel to our ancestral homeland is one of the central themes of the book. And it's an indispensable starting point for any search for peace in our region. So as I said, my intention here is not to review the entire book. I'm sure you'll be relieved at that, but I do want to share a few points before we get into what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation and discussion with our 3 guest panelists. I want to start with a simple question, and you're welcome to look at your watches and time me. I won't speak for more than 20 minutes. That was my promise to Miriam. Moria, Tani, you can signal to me so I know. Thank you. Why did I choose this title? Aside from the connection with my first book, the subtitle for my Israel tale is Finding Peace in the Promised Land, and that was a reference to more of an internal peace type of thing. But there's no question that everyone wants peace, right? It's a universal value. And whether that's inner peace and inner harmony, or whether it's in the family or other relationships, or in our community, or in our nation, I mean, we're in an election season right now, or between nations, it would be an assumption that everybody wants peace. So why is finding it so hard? Basically, it's nice in theory, the idea that everybody wants peace, but what if the other party, whether it's your spouse or your children or your parents or friends and neighbors or compatriots, like I said, in an election season, what if the nations surrounding you don't want peace? So if they're not looking for peace, then how do we relate to this as a fundamental value? And the answer is that in Judaism and in Israel, also in Christianity, and I think in most other major religions and ideologies, yes, including in Islam, peace is a fundamental value, but there is a higher value, actually. And that higher value, of course, is life. And in terms of our people and any other people, our national existence as a value supersedes the value of peace. In other words, if we have to choose between peace and our existence, we will choose our existence, which is why we carry out our defensive military operations, which we have done for the last 100 years, even before the founding of the state. So I think we can adjust our statement that peace is indeed a primary and a universal value, except when it isn't. And hence the title, Finding Peace, because it's a search. It requires deliberate consideration and effort rather than settling on supposedly obvious or easy or simple solutions which have been proposed over the last century. So a little bit more context. As many of you know, and Paul mentioned, my first book was about my hike on the Israel Trail and getting over my divorce, healing from my divorce. And the story in that book is of the hike itself and also the lessons that I learned that helped me to heal and then move on with my life. And that's one of the reasons why the subtitle, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, was so relevant for my hike across Israel. I hiked those 700 miles or 1,000 kilometers all alone over the course of 2 full months with a 25-kilo, 50-pound pack on my back. And it was a transformative experience. And the lessons that I learned, basically, lessons that I learned on the trek, physically, walking day after day, basically helped me not only to heal from my own and face my own personal challenge, but also gave me pause to think about the wider picture that we live in. And it was specifically while trudging along the banks of the Snir, the Hatzbani River, stream, creek, on the border between Israel and Lebanon, that I started to think about a particular issue, which was forgiveness. That for me in my life, forgiveness was very important as I began to think about moving on beyond my divorce, forgiving my wife, forgiving God for letting it happen, forgiving myself for my contribution to it. And I started to think, as I'm looking over at the hills of Lebanon, you know, forgiveness is going to take a very central place when it comes time to make peace between Israel and its neighbors. And that was basically the impetus to start thinking about the wider picture in international conflict. Well, the funny thing is, or not so funny, but I wrote about that initially, and my publisher of my first book insisted. The book was 2 books in one. It was the personal growth book in terms of healing from the divorce and the lessons learned, and it was the story of the trek and the history of Israel and the people I met and the geography and the hike itself. And my publisher said, that's 2 books in one, enough. You can't have a third book about the Arab-Israel conflict. And so I put it aside, and I waited until I thought it might be appropriate. The truth is that those 5 elements, and I'll describe them briefly, helped me to move on with my life, and there is a very obvious application to our predicament, or to any conflict for that matter. I'm very lucky, I'm very pleased and happy to know that there are hundreds, if not thousands of people who've told me in reading my first book that it helped them meet their own personal challenges, whether it was divorce like me, or death, or losing a job, or what have you. And there are many others that I've had conversations with, including Khaled and Einat and Rawan and others, and Paul, who have acknowledged there is an application here. What are those 5 elements, those 5 lessons? They are humility, acceptance, gratitude, forgiveness, and a sense of purpose to give meaning to our life. Applying them to our international conflict had to wait for 10 years since I wrote my first book. Why did I come out with the book now? We'll get in a second to a discussion of who am I to write this book in the first place. But there were 2 critical developments in the last 5 years or 10 years, which I'm sure you'll recognize immediately, that were the impetus to go ahead, finish the writing, and get the book published. The first, as you can imagine, we'll start with the negative, because one's negative and one's positive, was the October 7th barbaric massacre, rape, murder, hostage-taking that we're all familiar with. That was an impetus not only because of the barbarity of the attack itself, but to a certain extent, and forgive me for saying so, the attack itself and the response and the support for that attack across not every part of the Arab and Muslim world, but throughout, pervasively, the Arab and Muslim societies around us and European capitals and on American college campuses and by some American, obviously, and very many European political leaders, the response, the support for the attack itself, as well as the attack, to a certain extent, gave us Israelis a bit more freedom to speak bluntly. That it used to be when you talked about peace, and Paul, kind of you referred to this obliquely in talking about how few people are talking peace these days. We used to have to be very balanced. Doesn't matter whether you're left or right. You had to acknowledge everybody has to participate, everybody has to contribute, both sides have made mistakes, etc. After October 7th, we Israelis recognized we can and must speak clearly about the source of our conflict. And that liberty, that freedom to speak more clearly was one of the impetuses for me to write the book. The second one, which is much more positive, was, of course, the Abraham Accords. Because the Abraham Accords are a demonstration of the thesis that genuine Arab and Muslim voices for acceptance and peace, as well as humility, gratitude, forgiveness, and a sense of purpose, do exist, not only among isolated intellectuals or marginal groups, but at the level of national leadership, like in the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, and Morocco, Sudan, the 4 countries that joined initially the Abraham Accords. These leaders drew and draw on authentic Muslim and Arab values and wisdom, belief, and customs. And together, these two factors, October 7th and the horrific massacre and hostage-taking, rape and murder of October 7th, and the Abraham Accords, the real peace, the foundational, real acceptance of Israel that's built into the Abraham Accords, help us to identify the true source of our conflict. And I think for us and those viewing online, it's kind of a truism, but I have to say it clearly in any case, that the source of our conflict is today, as it has been the last 20 or 30 years, that it has been for the last 100 years, even before the founding of the State of Israel, is the violent and hostile rejection of any legitimacy given to the return of the people of Israel to our ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, or given to the establishment of the modern nation-state of Israel. Now, of course, there are demands to be made of Israel and the Jewish people and our supporters around the world. My book recognizes that in detail, and I certainly have to say that anytime I speak about it. However, there is an essential difference, including regarding the extremists, as it were, on both sides of our conflict. Jewish extremists are on the extreme, meaning by any objective analysis, Jewish advocates of hatred and violence are outliers, and they're rejected by the great majority of Jews and Israelis, while in too much of the Arab and Muslim world, violent rejectionism has been promoted by governments, by religious authorities, educational systems, movements, media, from Iran and Al-Qaeda, ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah, obviously, but also including Fatah and the PLO, Qatar, Turkey, and far too many of the leaders of too many Arab and Muslim societies and states around the world. Now, we have to distinguish, I learned this from my mentor, Natan Sharansky, in the years that I worked with him. We have to distinguish between leaders and people. And I was privileged to work with Natan for over a decade, introducing him to and connecting him with real human rights and peace and democracy activists across the Arab world, across the Muslim world. He always insisted that every human being everywhere want to improve their lives, care for their families, and live in dignity and in freedom, however they define that. And the tragedy is that generations have been indoctrinated in Islamist jihadist ideologies and cultures of grievance, hatred, and the glorification of death. There is another way. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And my friend and historian, Rabbi Ken Spiro, and many others have said, there is no moderate Islam. Our panelists, others I've spoken with over the years, and many others in the world will disagree with that. And we'll talk about it, but my own experience tells me otherwise. One of the most uplifting parts of my work, as I mentioned, was working and introducing Natan Sharansky to real people who were active on the fronts of fighting for and promoting human rights and democracy throughout the Arab and Muslim world, including those who self-identify as Palestinian. They, those who I'm speaking about, they actually claimed themselves an authentic connection to Islamic tradition, and those Islamic traditions of tolerance and dignity and coexistence, just as the Islamist jihadist leaders claim to the traditions of jihad and conquest as their inheritance of Islam and Arab society. I want to mention specifically my very good friend Mohammed Dajani, who's not able to be with us tonight, the leader of the Wasatiyah movement in Palestinian society. He's just one, but an important example of this new old approach to normative Islam. Wasatiyah means the middle path or moderation, similar to the Rambam's golden mean, Maimonides' golden mean, and similar to Benedict's or Augustine's concepts of temperance and moderation. His rational and restrained approach and interpretation of Islam and his focus on the future and on purpose rather than the past and grievance is profoundly important as a contribution to Muslim and Arab society, especially those who self-identify as Palestinian. Now, let's be honest, it is the ultimate in chutzpah for me as an Israeli, an American Jew, to come and say to the Arab and Muslim world, you have to reform. And yet, on the one hand, as I said when I talked about kind of the recognition of reality, the contention of the book is not that Arab or Muslim culture is in any way innately flawed. It's quite the opposite. What we demonstrate in the book is that all cultures have the capacity for renewal, and that Islam itself contains religious, ethical, historical resources for that kind of renewal. But the point is that we're at a pivotal moment here. Just as others have done before, Arab and Muslim societies can redefine their worldview from grievance to gratitude, from rejection to coexistence, from stories of victimhood to stories of shared purpose, and from inherited hatred to deliberate peace. And history proves that this is possible. The only question is, as always, which path is going to be chosen? The point is that this kind of change has to come from the people and the leadership of these Arab and Muslim nations and communities in the area and across the planet, from within those communities. An Israeli-American Jew is not going to bring it about. So the book is not primarily an appeal to the Muslim world or an advice about how Muslims should practice their faith. It's an observation about reality. The argument made here is compelling if it's simple. Without a conceptual reorientation from destruction to creation, from animosity to acceptance, from confrontation to coexistence, there will never be a resolution to the Arab-Israel conflict, nor peace in the Promised Land, or elsewhere for that matter in the Middle East. In other words, if there is going to be peace, there has to be an ideological change on the part of those who have been, for 100 years or more, the aggressor in our conflict. I can't state it more baldly. And that's the freedom that October 7th and the Abraham Accords has given us to call a spade a spade. And the point is the revolution is possible, but it has to be encouraged and supported by all those interested in promoting peace in the region, including and especially the leaders of the free world, as well as influential figures in Western culture, in the media and academia. If you care about peace, then you should believe in the necessity of this sort of transformation. If you don't care about peace, then we have nothing to talk about. So what has prevented peace in the Promised Land? This is what we're going to get to in our panel. And although I've prepared another 2 pages of notes of introduction, I'm going to stop here. And Miriam is smiling because we talked about this before. I always have a feeling there are times you can give a 60-minute lecture when you're in a university and the students are coming and they're prepared. And there are times when it's better to stop and have more of a conversation. So I want to close before I introduce our panelists by saying one thing about moral clarity. That's what we're looking for here. That we have to join moral clarity with an understanding of what our reality is here on the ground with hope. And we can and we must imagine an Arab and Muslim leadership based and built on humility rather than defiance. Education that teaches tolerance and peace rather than hatred. Religious sermons that elevate compassion over rage. Media that promotes goodwill and not incitement. Economic partnerships that bind destinies. Environmental collaborations, like with the Rawan Institute, one of our partners in renewable energy here, with Jordanian and Palestinian and Arab Israeli and Israeli middle-level managers and students looking to help to fight climate change. Collaborations like that unite communities because climate does not recognize any borders. And many more practical and pragmatic steps, which I have offered in the books. These are not dreams, they are designs. And the blueprint offered in the book with the 5 interlocking elements gives us a path with practical steps included to actually achieve that kind of coexistence. Humility opens the mind. Acceptance expands the heart. Gratitude nurtures resilience. Forgiveness frees the spirit and frees us from the bondage to the past. And purpose directs our energy towards creation, and healing, and coexistence. Applied across the divide of the Arab-Israel conflict, these 5 elements offer a moral, psychological, and practical roadmap, moving from hatred to humanity. And my hope is that policymakers, and particularly in the United States, who at this very moment are not only in the process of trying to help rebuild Gaza and try and foment some sort of peace between Israel and its neighbors, but in a kinetic military campaign, fighting for those very Western values that we share to try and bring about some sort of peace with Iran. So now we turn to the conversation that I promised. I'm very sorry that Dan Diker, the head of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, what used to be the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, couldn't join us. He had to jump on a plane on Thursday. But I am delighted and honored to have Khaled Abu Toameh, as well as Einat Wilf, as well as Rawan Osman, who is also a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, to have a conversation about the themes of the book. And as Paul mentioned, I've invited them to disagree with each other or with me, so we'll see how that goes. Let me introduce them first, and then I'll ask them to come up. Khaled has been a friend for more than 30 years. We've interacted in almost every position I've ever held, including programs for students, meetings between Sharansky and freedom democracy activists, as well as international leaders, briefings with foreign journalists when I ran Media Central and many other times. And throughout, Khaled has been a shining light of moral clarity and factual accuracy in the darkness of the wild propaganda which permeates public discourse about our region. Khaled is a Muslim, Arab, Israeli, Palestinian journalist, and he's a leading expert on Palestinian and Arab affairs. I'm taking the time to introduce you to him because many people won't know enough about the background of all 3 of them, and then we'll get to our conversation. Khaled has an Arab-Israeli father, Palestinian mother. He grew up in the Israeli Arab town of Bakal al-Gharbiya and studied, as I did, at the Hebrew University. He lives in Jerusalem. He writes for the Jerusalem Post and the Gatestone Institute, among others, and he's a recipient, very importantly, of the Daniel Pearl Award for Outstanding International Investigative Journalism and the Hudson Institute Award for Courage in Journalism, among many other accolades. And just by the way, it's kind of a sign of our predicament, isn't it, that honest journalism about the Arab and Muslim world takes courage, and yet there you have it. Khaled, your insightful writing and analysis of current affairs in the Arab world is second to none, and I look forward to your assessment of my thesis. Einat Wilf has also been a friend. Okay, 20 years and not 30, but we've known each other as long as Paul and I have known each other through the network that we were together part of called Cold Door, starting 20 years ago. And since then, our work and our interests have overlapped in all sorts of ways. A former IDF intelligence officer and foreign policy advisor to Shimon Peres and a member of the Knesset, as well as a strategic consultant with McKinsey and a senior fellow at the the Jewish People Policy Planning Institute, among other roles. Einat is one of Israel's clearest thinkers on Zionism, Palestinian rejectionism, as well as the conditions required for peace. She also has a new book called Peace Not Now, which is available outside, if I'm not correct. So I'm sure that she's willing to sign for you as we leave tonight. Einat holds a BA in government from Harvard, an MBA from INSEAD, and a doctorate in political science from Cambridge. It's very impressive. I have 2 masters, and you have a master's and a PhD, so we can't compete. I used to say some people collect butterflies, I collect degrees, and Einat, you've one-upped me on that. And Einat is the author of several books, including The War of Return. We should all be Zionists, and the new book I mentioned, Peace Not Now. She recently founded the Oz political party, but she's here tonight because of the rigor and independence of your thinking, not because of any political campaign, as you well know. The imperative of Arab acceptance of Israel's legitimacy is central both to Einat's work and to her book and my book, obviously. And Einat, I look forward also to your appraisal of my approach. And lastly, I am delighted that as of this morning, Rawan Osman, who I followed on social media and met for the first time this evening, is joining us tonight also. Rawan is a Syrian-born German activist, writer, and public speaker. And she's a content creator focused on advancing Arab-Israeli normalization and confronting anti-Semitism in the Arab world. In 2026, meaning this year, she received the Moral Courage Award at the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange in recognition of her advocacy and public engagement. She was born in Syria and grew up in Lebanon as well as in France. To mother, I believe, I'm trying to remember, your mother is Sunni and your father Shiite, or the opposite. Your mother is Shiite, your father is Sunni. Growing up in Lebanon, her own personal experience provides a very, very important perspective on what we'll talk about tonight. She's also the winner of the Oppenheimer Medal in Germany. She studied Islamic and Jewish studies at Heidelberg University. She appears in the documentary Tragic Awakening and serves as a visiting research and diplomacy fellow, as I mentioned, at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. So I would like to invite all 3 of you to come up and join with me. I look forward to your conversation, and I will start to introduce how we're going to do it when we sit down here. Thank you both. Thank you, 3 of you, for joining me. Make sure that they okay. So first of all, really thank you all for agreeing. Thank you for coming here this evening. And I have promised that we're going to finish well before 9 o'clock so everybody can get home for the Mondial, for the World Cup. I'm just making sure everybody knows that. I will be available afterwards for conversation or for signing of the book, but I'm going to help everybody understand how we're going to structure this conversation, and then we'll jump right into it. I've prepared questions for each of Khaled, Rawan, and Einat. I'll ask them the question. They will happily provide an answer. I'm then going to give the 3 of them a chance, with some facilitation from me, to continue the conversation, to respond to each other. I hope to argue a bit, but if not, that's okay too, because we're here to talk about peace and acceptance, right? So we'll be very forgiving. And then we'll open the floor to questions. I've left a lot of time for your questions and your arguments as well, because a question can also be a disagreement with one or all of the points that I've made or that you make. So shall we jump into it? Okay. Khaled, you're first. Pride of place.
He's prepared, look at it.
Oh, yeah, no, that's,
Very serious person.
yeah. I mean, it's funny because we're smiling and we can joke, but we obviously all know we're talking about life and death issues for ourselves, for Israelis, for Arabs, Palestinians, and to a certain extent for the rest of the world, depending on where this conflict that's ongoing with Iran goes next. Khaled, how realistic do you think the thesis is? Whether it's acceptance or forgiveness or shared goals in Arab and Muslim society, are these ideas just dreams? Is my hope and optimism founded on any reality that you're familiar with? That's what I want to ask you. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you, Aryeh, and thank you to the panelists, wonderful people, and thank you to everyone who came to this event. It's a good question, and I actually prepared myself. I even wrote some notes about it. Look, Aryeh, if you look only at the loud headlines, the state-sanctioned media or the radicalized fringes, it is easy to dismiss your thesis as a beautiful dream. But dreams only become reality when they are built on existing foundations, as you know. And I'm here to tell you that your hope and optimism are not blind. And I've known you for a long time. They are actually anchored in a very real developing undercurrent within Arab and Muslim societies. And that's very important. Now, a massive segment of the younger generation in the Arab world is increasingly exhausted by decades of ideological conflict, by economic stagnation, corruption, and the jihadist rhetoric, as you know. And this has brought nothing but ruin and devastation and catastrophes to these societies, the Arab societies and the Muslim societies. And I do see that the younger generation, or many of them, they're actually hungry for pragmatism, prosperity, and a normal life. And I'm talking about a certain segment of the younger generations in the Arab world. Now, if you look at the Abraham Accords, and you mentioned the Abraham Accords in your speech and also in your book, the leadership in places like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco, they didn't just sign papers. They actively began rewriting school curricula, as we saw, to teach tolerance and change, the state narrative around Jewish history and presence in the region, something that we don't have over here with the Palestinians, as you know. Despite all the talk about the change in the textbooks and all that, but the message remains very bad. And I've been saying this for a long time. The real education starts at home. Not in school, not at kindergarten. It's what your parents tell you. It's what you hear from your siblings. It's what you hear from your neighborhood, on the streets, in the mosques, in the media, and things like that. In order for a Palestinian child to hate Israel or to want to kill a Jew, he does not necessarily have to go to school and sit in the classroom and open the history book or the geography book and say, or the Islamic studies book and say, oh my God, these Jews are so bad that we need to kill them. It's become a cultural problem. The issue of hate, which you refer to a lot in your book, the absence of education for peace, which is very important. And those who have heard me in the past, I've been often asked, how come there is no real peace between Israel and the Palestinians? And I say, it's because I never saw any real attempt on the part of Palestinian leadership to prepare Palestinians for peace and compromise and concessions with Israel. In fact, I've seen the exact opposite, and it's always been like that. I've seen, and I continue to see, a massive campaign that is being waged in the mosques, in the media, in the rhetoric, on the streets, on the campuses, a campaign that aims to delegitimize Israel and demonize Jews. This campaign did not start before October 7, 1 month before October 7, or 10 years before October 7. It's always been there. And this campaign has actually poisoned the hearts and minds of millions of Palestinians to a point where it has even become dangerous to talk about peace with Israel. I spend a lot of time in Ramallah and Bethlehem and all these cities, and I have to admit that I keep a low profile. And sometimes people ask me, are you Khaled? And I even deny it. Because people like me are seen as too moderate, too pragmatic, people who are opposed to violence. We don't endorse the jihadist rhetoric and all that. And that's why I'm not very optimistic. You
So
radicalize.
where does the hope come from?
Sorry?
Where does the hope come from then?
Well, the hope comes from watching the other Arabs and other Muslims change. And one can only hope that, the Palestinians will also follow suit one day. I don't see that happening in the near future, by the way. I think the Palestinians have lost an entire generation or two. They have raised an entire generation or two on the glorification of jihad and death to Israel and death to America. And it will take time. It's true that the Palestinians are not like the Gulf people. You can't put all the Arabs and the Muslims in one basket. We're talking about different cultures and different societies and different mindsets. And that's very important to note. Some people think that all Arabs think the same. And we saw, we saw a glimmer of hope with the Abraham Accords. And all we can hope for is that it will expand. First of all, that it will expand, to countries like Saudi Arabia and all that. I think in the end, what the Palestinians need is regime change, leadership change, a shift, a switch in the mindset, which is not happening. The current leadership of the Palestinians, whether it's Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, is bad. It has never educated Palestinians for peace. The Palestinians are actually divided into two camps. One camp does not want to make peace with Israel, and the second camp cannot make peace with Israel. And it's always been like that, by the way.
So first of all, thank you, but I shouldn't thank you because yours is a more pessimistic outlook, and that's okay because it's very realistic.
I would call it realistic.
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm really pleased we did not script these exchanges, and two parts of my original opening remarks that I left out, you just covered. The Abraham Accords being a much more cultural, educational effort by the leaders of those nations to inculcate an acceptance of Israel among their people, which we didn't see in Egypt, which we didn't see in the Palestinian Authority with Oslo, which we didn't see with Jordan. In fact, the opposite. All three of those societies became more anti-Semitic, more anti-Israel, more hostile over the last 20 years. And I appreciate that. And also, just for the record, it's been 30 years since I've been working on these issues of democracy, starting with Mr. Sharansky. And I have said for those 30 years, because I've been privileged enough to meet the individuals like Mohammed Ajani, like Rami Nasrallah, like Walid Salem, like others, Palestinians and others who are committed to real peace with Israel. I've always said, I'm confident Palestinians as a society are educated, and I'm confident that one day they will overthrow their autocratic leaders and they will make peace. But what I'm not sure about, and this is where we agree, is it going to be in 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades, or 2 generations? I agree with you.
The bottom line, Aryeh, is that your thesis is realistic. I'm not saying it's not realistic. It's realistic because the alternative is catastrophe and death. And we have to, live in hope. And I do see more people in the Arab world waking up and looking around them. I do see a certain awakening, and that also gives me some hope. So I can't say that your blueprint is a fantasy. It's not. It's a positive step in the right direction, I would call it. And I can see that you do see the problem. You do see it, you touched it on it. And that's very important. So yes, it is realistic. I'm not saying it's unrealistic.
Okay. but it's not immediate, that's for sure. And in fact, when we get, Rawan, to your personal story, obviously you'll reflect some of the reality that Khaled is describing. But Einat, I'm going to turn to you next, if I may. How and why has your analysis changed over the years? You were a supporter of Oslo and the withdrawal from Gaza, and now you've written a book, on the other hand, saying peace, not now. And you lead a party whose platform includes a call for the very acceptance that I advocate, which I mentioned, and a rejection of what you call Palestinianism. And you see this as a precondition for peace. So we've talked a lot of theory so far, but I want to know what your read is on Israelis' attitudes and how your opinion has changed over the years, because I think it's reflective of many in Israel, certainly on the left or in the center of Israel. And I also see some of the humility that I write about. I see a lot of that in your talking and your writing, and a focus on the sense of purpose and having a goal. So please share with us your outlook.
So first, about the Israeli side. You know, you spoke to it about the fact that we've been kind of, for many, many years, the notion was that we always have to express a kind of symmetry. Extremists on both sides, concessions on both sides, hard choices on both sides, leaders on both sides. And what I found that when the book, The War of Return, came out, one of the most dominant still kind of responses to the book by Israelis, by Jews, was, you're letting Israel off the hook. Or people would say, a bit like you talk about the transformation required in the Arab and Islamic world towards embrace and acceptance of Jewish self-determination, but what do you demand of Israel? And when people say that, let Israel off the hook, what do you demand of Israel? We think in terms of, oh, the demands of Israel are give territory, dismantle settlements, change government. You know, those are typically retreat from territory, things like that. And I remember at one point, and that touches on your book, I said, I'm asking Israelis to do the hardest thing of all, which is essentially to engage almost in a self-transformation that no longer seeks simple solutions, easy paths, that accepts that things might take time, even a lot of time. You know, sometimes when I present the thesis of peace not now, of Arab embrace of Zionism, people are like, okay, you've gone completely nuts, never gonna happen. And I'm like, first of all, never is a long time. I'm a devout Zionist. I don't believe in never. But I tell people that even if you think it's never, it's still the right thing to pursue that vision. Because, so that's in terms of when I say that for Israelis, I'm asking the hardest thing of all is to actually pursue a very long-term vision without looking for simple solutions. Because, you know, a lot of people tell me, why is it still so difficult for people to receive your message? That we are facing on the other side a total ideology with rare and courageous exceptions that denies Jewish self-determination anywhere in the land. And I tell people, look, for as long as the message was, give them a state, get out of the territories, remove Bibi, get rid of Ben-Gvir Smotrich. You've noticed how abroad there's always one name. You know, get rid of that. You know, dismantle settlements. At least you have something to do. Like, you're like, okay, I know what I need to do. It'd be hard, maybe, you know, it's not the right political camp, but I know what I need to do. When you're talking about such a deep political, ideological, spiritual, your book is a lot about a spiritual transformation. For people, they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And for a lot of people, this is a message that's too tough. And they don't understand that Israelis, in many ways, we've done our neighbors no favors by engaging essentially in a racism of low expectations and the bigotry of low expectations, and essentially thinking that, okay, we can't expect those things. We can't have that vision. It's never going to happen. And I think that Israelis have done the Arabs no favors by essentially expecting so little of them. You spoke about our purpose. I think our purpose as sovereign Jews in the land of Israel is to issue a high invitation with high demands and high expectations. But it requires a very different way of being. And in terms of the practicality, people tell me, oh, how can you think that Israel will be willing to make arrangements? Look at our extremists. And I always tell them, look, the Jews are such a small minority in the region. I have this left-wing guy who's very annoyed with my work, and one point he wrote, Einat, is there anything in the world that will lead you to say that Israel is the reason we don't have peace? And I said, yes, if we had 1 billion Jews. If we had 1 billion Jews, it's on us. But as long as we're 7, 8 million, we're seriously not the problem, other than our desire for self-determination in our ancestral homeland, which indeed is the problem. But other than that, we've always said yes. We said yes for much less than peace. So for me, the issue is we require a self-transformation that is actually harder than all the simple solutions that we sold ourselves in the past. And the other thing is we talk a lot of the things that need to happen downstream, the transformation, the change. But for that to happen, and you did in your book the important work of naming the people who are leading these transformations, those lone voices in the desert, but to help them, in order to help them, we need to do some serious work to ensure that upstream, no waste gets dumped. Because I think what happens is that we expect change from a few courageous individuals. You mentioned, for example, Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib from Realign for Palestine. Who is Ahmed most angry at? When you read his most angry posts, they're not at Israelis. They're not even at Arabs. They're at the Westerners who continue to dump waste, who continue to indulge rejectionism, who continue to fund UNRWA, who continue to have no expectations, low expectations. And if you continue to dump waste upstream, there will never be change downstream. So I very much agree with what you write, but for any of that to happen, we cannot continue to rely on a few courageous individuals. We cannot leave them alone. We need to ensure that no waste gets dumped upstream so that we can actually clean the water downstream.
Well, thank you, because you know that I agree with a lot of that. And I'll just say one thing also. It's wonderful that there's so many things to talk about and things that I didn't actually get to, but I did, as you say in the book. One of the things that for me is so important to point out, especially in this kind of a discussion here in Israel, is that virtually nothing of what we're talking about here is political. In other words, in Israeli politics, and as I mentioned, we're in an election season, Einat you're aware of, you can be the biggest advocate of an establishment of a Palestinian state and still recognize that the source of our conflict comes from the rejectionism and the hostile, violent rejection of our legitimacy, even if you're in favor of a Palestinian state. And similarly, you can be in favor of annexation of Judea and Samaria and recognize that the source of our conflict is exactly that. And you talk about the upstream, whether it's the Americans or the Europeans or others that allow a Qatar and a Turkey and obviously Iran and the Palestinian leadership and others to foment this kind of culture of hatred, this death worship cult or what have you, with this bigotry of low expectations. I really appreciate you using that term. It's such a good term. And so it's so important that we make those demands. And I actually make a point in the book that I was writing, the last part of the book I was writing last year, as Iranians were dying in the streets in order to overthrow their tyrannical, autocratic, jihadist, rejectionist regime, which was against the West and Christians and all other infidels, not just Israel and Jews. And that's what we're about to get to talk about with you, Rawan. And the tangible support that's needed for that kind of, no, the West is not going to overthrow the Iranian regime, but Sharansky would be the first one to note, how did the Soviet Union's autocratic regime fall? Because of the support that Western governments gave to the dissidents in the Soviet Union by connecting the most favored nations status given to the Soviet Union, by connecting wheat sales to the Soviet Union so their leaders could feed their people, with an opening of their society, which is exactly what needs to be done with Iran today. And therefore some of the sanctions on Iran have that effect, or at least we hope so. Enough of me. Let's move on, Rawan, to you, and thank you again for joining at the last moment. It's no coincidence that much of what it does not working? Okay, good. Okay. Much of what Khaled and Einat, and obviously I have referred to, is reflected in your personal story. And therefore the question that I was going to ask Dan is completely fitting also for you to address and then to go further in terms of your own personal understanding. So many in the past and today focus on the narrow confines of this supposed, as you were referring to it, territorial conflict, and particularly with regard to those Arabs who self-identify as Palestinian, with a stress on maps and withdrawal, as you were saying, and not in the like. But I'm asking you, Rawan, can you widen the lens, I mean, based on your personal experience, Syria and Lebanon, and your own family history, and relate to the broader historical and ideological context, as well as geographical in terms of Syria, Lebanon, meaning Arab and Muslim society and identity and history and tradition. Can this thesis, this call for transformation of the rejectionist, jihadist Arab and Muslim ideology, can it be seen as realistic through that wider lens that basically you saw?
Yes. Yes. It's better than the echo there. I am very optimistic, but I see things slightly differently. First, to answer you, in the Arab world, and I dare say that, although the Arab world is not a monolithic group, because I lived in Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and in Qatar, I can say that nobody in the Arab world says, just give the Palestinians a state and then everything will be fine. You have to drive the Jews out of the Muslim world because this territory, this land is Islamic. It was Islamized, and you're not allowed to reverse the process, except in the case of the UAE. And I think the incentive was mostly economic. Not that they needed money, but they had a vision. And in order to build that vision, they teamed with the right people and bet on the right horse. Is this the case in the rest of the Arab world? I don't think that we're moving in a direction where the Lebanese or the Syrians or the Egyptians or even Iranians, to speak about the Muslim world, and realistic Muslims or immigrants in the West who heard that rhetoric for decades, we're going to wipe Israel out. They know that this is not going to happen. And the acceptance comes from realism and also because they are sick of the Palestinian cause. I'm not for peace in the Middle East because I'm an idealist. I was an idealist when I was a teenager and I recovered. Where is this partner when we talk about peace? I love what Einat says. What do we mean by peace? The term was emptied from its meaning. What do we mean by peace? Kumbaya, give each other a hug. This is not going to happen because there is no partner on the other side. Your problem is not with the Lebanese, with Hezbollah, but it's not primarily with the Lebanese, with the Syrians. You have to resolve your issue with the Palestinians. If the Palestinians said tomorrow, okay, it's your ancestral homeland, we'll find a solution, then they take away the pretext from the rest of the Muslim world to be committed to erase Israel, right? Where are those partners in the Palestinian world? The Arabs understood that no matter what you offer them, they are problematic. They've become agitators, they glorify violence and martyrdom, etc. Even when MBS said, I'll join the Abraham Accords, but you should give them a Palestinian state, what did Hamas do? They spat in his face. And after October 7th, they are still convinced that they disrupted Saudi from, or they prevented Saudi from joining the Abraham Accords, at least in the foreseen future. Those who live in the Arab world, and I'll speak about Lebanon and Syria, for example, who cannot afford the school fees, who cannot pay their rent, who don't have medical insurance. We don't have medical insurance in Lebanon and in Syria, except if you work for the UN or for an international bank. We don't have a pension system. People are impoverished for no reason. Now, I don't look at them and think they are too stupid to achieve in life. I know them. Many of them are my friends. They can, but how is the question? The Palestinian cause is crippling our region, and they are sick of it. They want a different reality. Instead of waiting for months at the embassy of UAE, for example, to get a visa, to go earn money and support your entire family, why can't Beirut be like Dubai? They are waking up. Even Einat, who's super realistic, and in my mind, she's one of the most intelligent people I ever met, is still saying we need to help them. The Israeli always thinks we need to help them. We should do something differently. This time, you can help them by saying, here is where we draw the line. I take it a bit further because I can say what many Israelis can't say or don't want to say. Especially after October 7th, the Palestinian leadership proved to us again that they're neither fit for governing, nor are they safe for their own children. No, you do not get to govern them yourselves. And before we discuss whether you're going to govern yourselves, although you're not good to your own people, let's talk about the Kurds. They're a tiny minority of 50 to 60 millions. They don't throw a tantrum and kill thousands of people every few years. It's enough. When the world understands that the Israelis are no longer willing to offer concessions, they will start pressuring the Palestinian leadership. Last week, I had a meeting with Professor Mohammed Dajani, and we were discussing wasatiyya. And I asked, when was it established? Naively, I thought around the Abraham Accords. And he said, in 2007. How many are part of that movement? He explained to me, and he showed me booklets about the curriculum also in East Jerusalem and in the so-called West Bank. And he told me, I asked him why, before we expand and pitch this project to this party, to that party, to the UAE, to the EU, offer them proof of concept. Did it work? Did you ever manage to succeed at any level with the Palestinian Authority? And he told me that nobody responds to his letters, nobody accepts to meet him. And he showed me what they're teaching the children. So the problem is not in Lebanon, it's not in Syria, it's not in Egypt. We have a lot of problems there. But in order to strip them from the pretext to incite against the Jews, to always be moved, rallied on an emotional basis, solve the issue. How? You pressure the Palestinian leadership by holding them accountable. Enough is enough. What they've done to their own people is enough. And the only way, in my mind, the Israelis can help is by saying, no, we're no longer accommodating your tantrums. I don't care what you want. Realistically speaking, this is what the past showed. I'm not interested in what you want, and I'm not committing to giving you East Jerusalem back because I'm not giving you parts of my ancestral homeland if your claim is true. All we need them to do, with the support of the Muslim world, but in order for them to accept it, we have to say it out loud. We have to call a spade a spade. You have to tell them, Jerusalem for us is like what Mecca is to you. And if Jerusalem for you is what Mecca is for them, and they're not willing to let a non-Muslim visit Mecca, even visit Mecca, how do you want us to give you the Western Wall? It's about time you said it, and you try it. You say sometimes crazy things, and you see nothing happen. You imagine if we do this, the world will fall apart. No, you just have to do it. It's like the Band-Aid. Remove it once and for all, and let's move to a different Middle East where Palestine doesn't have to exist the same way we imagined it earlier. Not the two-state solution, not the one-state solution. Let's zoom out and be creative.
Wow. Yes. Thank you, Rawan. Two quick responses to that, and then I'm happy to invite all of you to respond to each other as you'd like, and then we'll open to questions. On the one hand, what you said about Hamas, I'm going to broaden that. I think it's true for all of the autocratic, dictatorial, rejectionist, jihadist regimes around us. I'm not going to apologize for quoting Natan Sharansky again, because he is a great thinker and a hero of the world and the human rights movement. He has always said, democracies don't make war with other democracies. And the best way to judge the prospects of peace between nations are how a leadership treats their own people. So your point about Hamas is as relevant to Iran or Hezbollah or the new leadership of Syria and its treatment of Druze, and the Egyptian government and its treatment of Copts. And it doesn't matter where we go, the question of the persecution of minorities in a country is an indication of how tolerant, open, accepting, peaceful they might be to Israel or their other neighbors. And we all know the history of the Arab and Muslim world is of conflict, inter-Arab and inter-Muslim conflict as well. And so I support what you said and agree. And I'm just going even beyond the issue that you raised, which of course is true for Hamas. The second thing I want to say is beyond Mohammed Dajani, which yes, it is a real disappointment, I would say personally for me, because of the democracy activists that I know personally, and I think for any of us who've been observers of this over the last 20 or 30 years, that there has been no traction, that the leaders of the more moderate movements in Palestinian society in particular have not become popular, been accepted, been promoted, forget by the West. That's its own problem that they haven't been promoted by the West or supported, but they haven't been promoted or accepted in their own people. But I want to note that there's an organization I'm sure you're at least somewhat familiar with called the Global Imams Council, which was established in 2014, I believe, 2014, by Shiite and Sunni imams, clerics in Iraq, specifically with the goal to counter the jihadist ideology. There are 1,500 clerics today in the Global Imams Council. It's based in Fajr, I think, where the seminary is in Iraq, and it's active in 70 countries around the world. Now, I don't know enough about it to advocate, massive Western governmental or financial support for it, but I'm just noting that while that's still a drop in the bucket with 1 billion Muslims on the planet and 300 million Arabs in our neighborhood, it's still more than Mohammed Dajani alone, who is a hero, who is doing his best. And he was fired from Al-Quds University for taking students where? To Auschwitz, which almost has nothing, but obviously everything to do with Israel. But it was an act of humanity, of understanding the other, of reaching out, of trying to break down barriers. And he was fired and obviously castigated roundly through Palestinian society. And they burned his car. This is true. So Khaled, I'm happy to welcome each of you to elaborate or to respond to each other. And then I hope that there are a lot of questions or comments from those of you sitting with us. And when we're done with that, we'll happily wrap up. Who wants to go first? Yeah? I'm very, very open, and I also have no problem with a bit of silence for people to contemplate and start. My kids are saying, what? You don't like silence. Anybody have a question or a comment? Yes, I think, is that Can't quite see. Yes, I'll give you the microphone. Make sure this works. And I am conscious of the time. We're doing okay.
So, thank you, Aryeh. I haven't read your book yet, but I will. And if I understand your thesis correctly, what you're saying is that a prerequisite to peace is a transformation, minimally on the Palestinian side, to go from rejection to coexistence and from rage to pragmatism. So what I'd like to know is, does Israel have any agency or any role to play in this transformation, both the government of Israel and the people of Israel?
I appreciate the question, and Einat, I'm already telling you, I want you to also address this because you're obviously very involved in Israeli society. In the chapter of the book which focuses on practical suggestions, which I felt was a very important element, I didn't want it just to be a theoretical discussion. I bring a lot of examples of what can and should be done. I mentioned in my remarks, for instance, just as one example, cooperation on environmental issues. And whether it's pollution, whether it's water management, waste management, whether it's renewable energy, there's a lot of things that are already being done and can be done more in economic interaction. In fact, one of my one of the impetuses, is that a way to say the plural of impetus? One of the motivating factors of the book I mentioned was the Abraham Accords. I went on 3 different business trips to the United Arab Emirates and to Bahrain with Startup Nation Central. And I was amazed at the different kind of business cooperation that we were discussing, as well as this embrace that we were talking about that we do see from the government and from the people. So yes, there are things which Israelis and Israel can do, government, private sector, even families and individuals, whether it's sports events for kids between Palestinians and Israelis or between Bahrain and Israel. And we've seen some of that. There's more also. Think about, do you know that the parents' circle you may be familiar with? These are parents of, unfortunately, of children who have died or been killed in the conflict, one side or the other. I'm not making any political statement about any balance, morally or otherwise, between them. But the fact is, these are grieving parents who have put aside their grief and anger and distress in order to try and work for this shared purpose that we've discussed of peace and coexistence. Those kind of people-to-people interactions are incredibly important. However, your question presupposes, and it's very interesting that Rawan kind of related to this, presupposes that Israel has to do more. Well, I know, I've lived here for 40 years, and for 30 or more, 35 of those years, as long as I've known Khaled, I've been involved in some of those people-to-people interactions. We used to have, I worked with one of the first startup companies that had a Palestinian technological team in Ramallah who were working on the software development for the company. Those kind of interactions are very important, as well as I said, social and sport or what have you. But it's not a one-way street. Israel has always championed those kind of ideas. And as Khaled mentioned, people who are interested in that on the Palestinian side or the wider Arab world are often castigated or prevented or afraid to follow that kind of a path. So yes, we have what to do, and we do have agency, but it only goes so far if, as I said in the very beginning of my comments, if the other side isn't interested, then you can only push it so far, which goes back to one of the things that Rawan was saying. Einat?
Yes, the agency that I see that Israel has is on several levels. The first, I'm a big believer in ideas, framing, words. We've had for a very long time leadership that I think spends political capital domestically and internationally on the wrong issue. So my favorite kind of example is that over the years, Netanyahu often likes to go and say, I prevented a Palestinian state. And he says it multiple times, even though he said yes to a Palestinian state several times. But whenever he would say that, I would always go and tweet that it's not nice to take credit for the one achievement that the Palestinian national movement actually has, because he did not prevent a Palestinian state. In fact, no Israeli leader has ever done so, because tragically, the Palestinians do not want a state for themselves if it has to live next to a Jewish state and end the war against Zionism. In fact, even when you had Israeli leaders who practically begged Palestinians to take a state, they failed. So when you have Israeli leaders spending political capital domestically and internationally, pitting Israelis against each other, it took me a while to realize that the whole discourse on a Palestinian state is mostly a Jewish discourse, Jews arguing with each other, but there's no bride. And so just the fact that so much political energy is wasted on that, we need leadership that on the one hand, again, is able to chart and genuinely embody a vision of peace, while focusing domestic and international energy on the only obstacle ever to that, which is the total Arab and especially the Palestinian Arab rejection of Jewish self-determination, sovereignty in any part of the Jewish ancestral homeland. So the first is the words, the focus, the vision, the focus of energy. And then once you do that, as I said, stop dumping waste. Go on a diplomatic offensive against UNRWA. Don't allow money to go in for this kind of indoctrination. Actually monitor what goes in the schools, in the mosques. We have this vision also from our government, our defense establishment, as long as they're in the schools, that's good. I'm like, that's saying that as long as the Hitler Jugend have extracurricular activities, we're happy. No, it actually matters what's in the schools, what's in the mosques. We tend to not deal with ideology and only deal with security when it hits us downstream. This is where I think Israel has tremendous agency.
Thank you, Einat. Rawan or Khaled, any other?
I can only agree with Dr. Einat and what she said, that Israel doesn't have to go around saying, we prevented a Palestinian state, because the Palestinians themselves prevented the creation of a Palestinian state.
Right.
I don't need to remind you that they had many opportunities to establish a state, but they missed it. They missed it for many reasons, because one of them is that, no Palestinian leader is authorized to make concessions to Israel. And this is something that people don't understand. And it's time to believe or listen to what Palestinian leaders say. And I used to listen to what Yasser Arafat said. I sat with him several times, not as a friend, but as a journalist. And I also sat with Abu Mazen several times. And I speak to them in Arabic, not in English. And I give them credit for being very honest. And their message is, or their position is, Israel must give us 100% or there is no deal. And it's very firm. While the Palestinian leaders are being very clear about their demands and saying that, we want 100% or there is no deal, I see a debate in Israel about, where should the borders be and how much we should give, and only if we give 90% and 88%. No. Even if you give 98.9%, the answer would still be no. I was invited together with a small group of Arab reporters to Yasser Arafat's office shortly after the failed Camp David summit. And it was an off-the-record briefing by Arafat. And we were sitting there, a small group of Arab reporters, and one of my colleagues raised his hand and asked, "Oh, Mr. President, what happened? Why did Camp David fail?" And Arafat looked at us as if he was surprised by the stupid question. We were lucky he didn't shoot us because he had a pistol. And then Arafat said, "Oh, Camp David failed because the Jews did not give me 100% of what I asked for." So the man was being very honest. And this is where we are standing. Israel is facing two camps, and each one of them is demanding from Israel 100%. One camp wants 100% of everything, of what Israel took in 1948 and in 1967. And the second camp is saying, give me 100% of what you took in 1967, but I cannot guarantee you anything after that. Give me a Palestinian state in the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, and let's see what happens. I cannot guarantee you anything. And if I were Israel, I would tell Abu Mazen, listen, the last time we gave you land, you ran away from that land. And what guarantees do I, Israel, have that if I give you this land, it's not going to end up in the hands of Hamas and Hezbollah and Nasrallah and Fadlallah and all the Allahs around there? So we are just, I'm sorry for being too pessimistic. I spend a lot of time in the field. Unlike many of my foreign colleagues, I don't interview people in English. I don't spend time talking to Palestinian officials. I talk to the ordinary Palestinian. I listen to the authentic voices. And by the way, that's one of the, I work a lot with the international media in the West Bank. One of the reasons I keep saying why foreign journalists don't get it or keep getting it wrong when it comes to the Palestinians is because they go to Ramallah and they sit with senior officials who speak to them in English, tell them what they like to hear, and do not listen to what the ordinary Palestinian says. And I keep saying, if you really want to understand the thinking on the Palestinian street, you need to sit in the coffee shop, you need to talk to the cab driver, you need to talk to the farmer, you need to stop in a village and chat with people in their own language, by the way, not in English.
You're bringing me back to memories of Media Central 20 years ago.
Yeah. And you did a great job, establishing that center.
I just want to say one thing along these lines about agency. So what does that really mean? What are we saying? Israeli leaders, right, left, and center, should be saying to Marco Rubio, President Trump, J.D. Vance, let's not go there, and European leaders and others, these truths. And that is, when you talk about agency, you're not talking about people to people, but government to government and individuals. These are the things that we don't say because we're obsequious and we want to curry favor with the, I can't wait for the first conversation between Netanyahu or whoever is our prime minister and the new prime minister of Britain. That's going to be a great conversation. I would love it if whoever is speaking with them on behalf of Israel says, can we just have 3 minutes where I can set the record straight for you so you understand what we're really dealing with instead of this, wild propaganda that you've somehow absorbed over your very short political career. But okay, well, it's not.
Aryeh, as you know, Israel has been doing a very bad job when it comes to relaying messages and PR and Hasbara, and that's very unfortunate, by the way.
Unfortunately, yeah. Ron, anything to add, or should I go to the next question? Okay. Yes. Come here down to the front. I see your hand raised there, and I see one here.
Hi, Aryeh. Thank you very much for the very interesting talk, and all of you. I actually noticed maybe some differences of opinion between Einat and Rawan, and Aryeh, you encouraged debate. So, Rawan, you were saying we should just state what is ours, and put the things out there and let them deal with it. And I think that was the theme out of the three of you. But I also read your book, loved it, Einat. Please not now. Yeah, just read it. I recommend it to everybody. Sorry, I didn't get to read yours. Yeah.
You've had it for a week and a half, seriously, since your birthday.
And not over there, you are talking about withdrawing basically civilians of some of the West Bank and basically saying that's not ours, right? And now I'm wondering, is there a gap between there, or am I just imagining between saying already declaring upfront part of the West Bank is not ours? And I'm thinking of the rabbi saying the Gemara, Shtayim Ochazin, זה אומר כולה שלי, זה אומר חציה שלי. So, I'm sorry, I'll translate it into English. There is a sage question about two people debating on ownership on a piece of cloth, or an expensive piece of cloth. One says, all of it is mine, and the other one says, half of it is mine. Then the sages have ruled 2,000 years ago that in such case, you give it to the person, all of it is mine. So I think that's what I heard from Rawan, and I think I've heard you saying, Einat, we should say half of it is mine. So I wonder if I'm recognizing gap down.
Interesting. And not first?
Sure. So first, thank you about the kind words on the book. I will say there are copies outside of the book, Peace Not Now. You are welcome to take them, the price of which you read them. So don't take if you're not going to read. That's what I write in the book, Peace Not Now, is actually more specific. What I said that once you understand that by now we have enough empirical kind of data to know that Israel controlled territories, got out of territories, built settlements, removed settlements, had left-wing governments, right-wing governments, and the impact of all of that on the Palestinian Arab attitude to Jewish self-determination in any part of the land has been an absolute and complete zero. So then that turns the question towards what do we want? And here I have my argument is what Israel lacks is clarity in the sense of what are the areas that are under Israeli civic control. I argue that we need to bring some of the areas under Israeli civic control, what is known as by some annexation, but some legal scholars have made it clear to me that the precise term is Israeli civic law. And everyone who is brought under Israeli civic law, I believe, should be an equal citizen. And then the territory that is not brought under Israeli civic law, I'm not saying that it's not ours. I'm saying that it needs to come under what I call active military control, style the Americans in Japan, which begins to concern itself with the education, with the mosques, not like we have now where we outsource the education to UNRWA and to the Palestinian Authority and the mosques, we don't care what happens there. But for example, tomorrow 1 million Jews come from the West, and the Arab war against Zionism has not ended. And another territory can be brought in a way that everyone's an equal citizen. I'm not against it. I'm just saying that it has to be clear. It has to be in a Knesset vote. And I believe what I call the ambiguous sovereignty that we have, I think that's a disaster. So I'm not saying that it is ours, it's not ours. What I'm saying is that what we need is clarity for our own citizens of what is under Israeli civic law, and everything else should be under active military control towards changing the ideology, the education, with the view of bringing the Arab war against Zionism to an end. That's the vision I propose.
See, I'm not Israeli. And that's that empirical evidence. I can afford dreaming. I can set the goal and say I'm going to work towards it. But people like Einat, politicians, have to actually do the work. So realistically speaking, yes, you need clarity. Instead of people saying the occupied territory, you're occupying the West Bank, I'm going to boycott all the produce or whatever you produce in the West Bank, I'm not importing that, etc. And bullying, like heckling people around the world. Say it's ours. We need clarity. Say it's ours and say why it's yours. Explain it to people and go forward with it. I'm saying that it is time you stop signaling to the world that you're willing to make concessions. Why am I saying this? Not because I want to hurt the Palestinians. This is not coming from bigotry. But if we do understand the Arab-Israeli conflict, we know that it's a religious war. This is how it started, or this is what the Muslims wanted it to be. And when we talk about Palestine, we're talking about the British mandate of Palestine, which consisted of today's Israel, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the East Bank. The East Bank is 78% of the territory, roughly. It became Jordan. Why does it bother nobody on planet Earth that the majority of the land was gifted to a family that came from the Arabian Peninsula? And the Hashemites became royalty. So I don't want to listen to Queen Rania lecturing us. Thanks to Israel, you made royalty, honey. But we need to be clear. I have a friend in Germany, where I live since 2013, a public figure from Munich, and he's a Jew who gave up on Israel and left. And we were friends. And he said, I had enough. They are psychopaths. They don't know what they want. The Palestinians are unbearable. Israel has no future. He gave up on Israel. And I had a serious problem with this. This can be the end of our friendship. And he told me, what do you want from me? What can I do? I'm just a journalist. I told him, so was Herzl. One has a vision and a spine, and one doesn't. It's not about you, about how you feel. You have to have the courage to sit maybe with Palestinian leaders and tell them, I had enough. I see your bullshit. I had enough. And I bear a moral responsibility towards the children in Gaza. I'm not happy to see how they're suffering. What do they need? A clean bed, a decent meal. To recover from the trauma, they need to leave. Not because I'm bigoted. They need to leave because Gaza is inhabitable. But in order for us to achieve all that, we need clarity. We need leaders among the Israelis who said, we tried and we give up because you're not a good partner. And then you put them under enough pressure when the world understands that the Israelis had enough. And this has been wrong since October 7th because I don't want all the Israelis to speak in the same voice. Of course you disagree, it's a democracy. But you shouldn't signal that you're willing to make concessions. You shouldn't fight for the two-state solution because they can smell your weakness and they prey on that division.
Wow. Yeah. So I do see a few more hands raised, and I want to be able to have a few more people ask questions. I think we'll go to, there's a gentleman back here with your hand. Yeah. Before you do, I just want to amplify one thing that you just said, Rawan, and actually it's partly what you said, Einat. One of the things that I've believed for 40 years, and I talk about this very obliquely in the book in terms of my studies at UC Berkeley of Mahatma Gandhi and Gandhian methods of conflict resolution, which focus on truth, satyagraha, a struggle with truth, that you have to speak your truth clearly, and it doesn't dictate any policy prescription. So in other words, we need to say, this is our ancestral homeland. The factual elements of history, as Rawan, you just described them, and Einat, you too, these are undeniable. The Jewish people, the people of Israel, have a connection to this historic homeland. The British mandate was given by the international community to establish and foment the establishment of a Jewish home in Palestine, including across the border in eastern Palestine, etc. These are facts, and that is our position. Now, you want to discuss possibilities of some concessions, and Rawan, you're saying, no, don't even consider that at this point. And I'm saying, my point is, we need to say, this is our land. That's our starting point. You want to talk with me about, it's like a kid. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, I'm not being patronizing to Arabs, Muslims, or Jews. When a kid says, I want a cookie, you say to them, yes, you may have a cookie after you've finished your supper. Your starting point is, yeah, you can have the cookie, but your other starting point is, I'm not giving this kid a cookie until they finish their dinner. And we're literally talking about the same thing. This is our land. This is our ancestral homeland. We are the only extant indigenous people to this part of the Levant. That's our starting position. You want to talk about concessions or peace or negotiations? Great, let's talk, but that's our starting point. That would be my position in any case. Yes, please.
I want to thank the panel for great ideas. I want to throw out something else. Can you give a State of Israel some advice of what to do with the cold peace between the Egyptians and the Jordanians?
I'm going to jump in quickly with one sentence, and then any of you can respond. The answer is the same as we should be demanding from Western governments, everything we've been talking about here, that they need to demand from Arab or Muslim governments, people, movements, organizations. That's what we and the Western world should be demanding of Egypt. The cessation of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hostility in their education system, their media, their cultural milieu, and their political leadership. That seems to me to be the first step. You may have other ideas. One?
I'm just going to briefly say something because I think Einat has much more to say. When Trump said that maybe the Egyptians and the Jordanians should take some Gazans, I was in New York, people were laughing at him. On the same day, the Wall Street Journal published an article listing the 10 top countries depending on US aid. And Jordan and Egypt are among them. So maybe an idea would be conditioned aid. You can incentivize Jordan, especially when Trump is in office. Think whatever you like about him, but he's our best friend at the moment. They can be incentivized to revise their ways. And I learned from Einat mostly about how despicable the situation in Egypt is. And they are. I can tell you, I grew up with Egyptian drama, their series, their movies, especially every Ramadan, feeding conspiracy theories.
Exactly. The book Peace Not Now actually has a pretty serious rereading and rethinking of the Egyptian peace agreement. And in many ways, we're sitting at the place that most celebrate it. But it's a pretty critical review that looks at what we gave and what we got, and especially compared to what happened in Syria at the same time. And the ideas here, look, some things are water under the bridge. But we go back to the fact that we've developed such low standards, such low expectations. We call what is barely a glorified long-term ceasefire a peace agreement, and we celebrate it. And we allow, again, I go back to the upstream. Egypt poisons the upstream with the worst. I sometimes say that Israel pays the price that the Arab world, especially in Egypt, was not denazified after World War II. Really, like of the worst kind, TV series, books. And Israel has leverage, economic agreements, lobbying in the US, and we don't use it to demand things that are upstream. We only examine security downstream. And again, this is part of the transformation that I think we have to undergo, to have those expectations, those demands, use those levers to really have to tell the Egyptians that they committed to something that, at least on paper, was supposed to look like the UAE. And that we expect now to uphold those commitments and to use our levers whenever we are in a position to use them, to have that. And Israelis, again, our entire defense thinking needs to understand, our entire notion of what security is needs to change from how many tanks they have to are we invited to the opening of the pyramids in Giza, to the museum.
Good example. Okay. One last question. Happily give to Rabbi Kurtz. Okay, Idel, you both can ask your question. We'll answer. And looking at the time, then we'll have some final comments. Do we have a microphone? Thank you very much. Thank you, Adar.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm not a professional student of history, and certainly about the ending of World War II. But in the first month of the Israeli response to the horrible, the October 7th genocide of Israelis, there was this incredible conversation on some of the media about how the Gazans will, of course, just like Trump said, okay, we'll have them go out of Gaza, but there was other talk about their re-education. Something worked in Germany, it seems, and in Japan. Somebody made it work. Now, I don't know all the details and whether there was opposition in Germany that was of any real strength. But it sounds like what you're saying is that part of it isn't happening because Israel isn't clear. But I didn't think that anybody expected Israel to go in and re-educate the Gazans and go into their educational system because they would say it as not paternalism, but rather,
Interference.
yeah. So the expectation would have been, I guess, what, that Western governments would do this? Why did it work at the end of World War II? Thank
Happily,
you.
we'll address that. And if you can pass the microphone to Adele, you can ask the last question, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, question first and then answers?
Yeah, you go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll.
All right, my question is a personal one for Rawan. There is a phrase, I'm sure you know it, like Ruth among the alien corn. And that's what you remind me of, your unparalleled solidarity and identification with the Jewish people, with the state of Israel, is nothing less than incredible.
Agreed.
And so my question to you is your life in danger? Are you in peril? Traveling as you do, living where you live, speaking out the way you do? Do you have to take security precautions in this unstable and very scary world? Thank you.
Thank you, Adele, for the question. In fact, I think, Rawan, I'm going to ask you to answer that question first. And then because the other question is a little bit more general, we'll use our answers to that question to kind of bring us to a close.
Gladly. Thank you for your kind words. No, I'm not afraid at all. I think you said that I remind you of Ruth because you know that I'm converting to Judaism. And it is that emunah that helps me get out of bed in the morning, believing that Israel will prevail. I know it in my heart. So I'm not afraid at all. I'm not suicidal. I do not need security at this point, except when I speak at university campuses, especially in Europe and in Canada. So where it makes sense, I have bodyguards because I'm perceived as a propagandist. But no, not at all. I think we have a mission. And once you see, you cannot unsee. And I have a moral obligation, and I'm not doing the Israelis a favor. Once we resolve this issue, and we will, Bezrat Hashem, things will change for everybody in the region. People will be able to live better. It's not exclusively the well-being of the Israelis who keep me going. We need it. I want it for my Syrian friends. I want it for my Lebanese family who are still there. I want my mother to be able to visit her mother, who's soon 100. We can't, not because of the Israelis. All the problems in the region are caused by the Palestinian cause. And who suffers most of all? The Palestinians. It's enough, right? So I'm not afraid. Thank you for feeling this way. Especially, I'm not sad as well. I'm not suffering. Here in Israel, I have a huge family and I have a lot of friends. I lost a few and I made many more. And people sometimes ask me about the cost or the sacrifice. I have friends who lost their legs, their eyes, their children. I think I'm fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Rawan. Thank you. So I actually don't want to go on and go back to the theoretical intellectual discussions, but I think we should and have a bit of closure. So the question about whether or not Israel takes responsibility, has responsibility for Palestinian or the wider Arab world, I'm going to expand the question in terms of their education and their cultural or social milieu, and the comparison to Germany and Japan. I'll start by saying, Daniel Pipes, by the way, from the Middle East Forum, was very helpful with me in writing the book. And he has a very, very specific prescription for real peace in our region. As he wrote in the blurb for my book, he actually takes a harsher view than I do. And his prescription is total victory. Not necessarily militarily, by the way, but ideological total victory, which goes right to what we've been saying about we stand up and we say Palestinians have to acknowledge our right, like Einat says, and Rawan says, stand on your ground and stand for, say what you stand for. And Khaled, you've talked also about the clarity needed. After World War, ouch, that was a mic drop. Okay. after World War II, or in the conclusion of World War II, the Allies basically declared and achieved total victory over Japan and Nazi Germany, and obviously fomented there, insisted, foisted upon them coercively a re-education project. But it was absolutely part of the whole program that it was Germans and Japanese new leaders that led the effort to educate their people, that although empire building and oppression and racism and what have you was part of their cultural milieu and thousand-year-old tradition, there were other thousand-year-old traditions in Japanese culture and religion and German culture and religion that could point to a more tolerant, accepting, coexistence, peaceful type of nature. That's what we're talking about here. And yes, I'll speak for Einat, that her book, The War of Return, specifically relates to that. And she's already mentioned UNRWA and the responsibility that any occupying or otherwise controlling organization or force has on, in terms of helping to educate the children and the people of that society. And everybody here is talking about how we need to encourage, or have Western countries encourage, which is to say force or use our economic leverage or otherwise, encourage other Arab countries to do what the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco have done as part of the Abraham Accords. So the answer is yes, even though it sounds patronizing, it doesn't, because that's what Rawan is saying. It's for the benefit of humanity. The subtitle of my book is From Hatred to Humanity. We're talking about humanity in the sense of the noun of we should all have a sense of humanity, but it is also for the benefit of humanity. No more war will benefit all the residents of our region, as well as all the other peoples of the world, when Iran and America, or Israel and Lebanon, or the rest of the countries in the region put down their arms and want to work together for the mutual goals of coexistence and peace and tolerance and living together. So that would be my answer to your question. I'm happy to invite each of you to have a concluding remark, and I'll forgo my concluding remarks, and Paul, you can bring us to a close. Khaled, okay, you were first before.
My concluding remark is that your book should be translated into Arabic, so that Arabs can read it. I mean, we're sitting here and we're talking, we almost agree on everything, and we're talking in English. But again, it's a very important book. You raise very important issues. You offer, pathways to peace and coexistence, and you believe in interfaith and dialogue and all these things. That's very important. But the question is, how do you relay these messages to the Arab world, to the Islamic world? And that's very important. We need more Arabs and Muslims on board. You talk about the too few Arabs and Muslims who are pragmatic and moderate, and we need to search for ways to, widen expand the pro-peace or the pragmatists in the Arab and Muslim world. And I think, we should, as I said, probably translate your book into English, write about it into Arabic, write about it in Arabic, and hope that, things will move forward in the future. But thank you very much for this important book, and I read it, and I was honored, to even write something about it. What do you call it, a blurb? Or
Blurb,
yeah. And, it's an honor to have you as a friend, Aryeh. I've known you for 30 years, a very remarkable man, very pragmatic, very smart, and it's an honor to have you as a friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Khaled. Thank you. Einat?
I'll just give an observation that I found very useful. Over the years of talking about these issues and advocating for them, I noticed a vast difference between what I call doing good and feeling good. And what I discovered is so many people in this field, they claim they want to do good, but they just want to feel good. Because every parent knows that, every governor is like, doing good often requires doing things that don't feel good. And that's your question about the Americans, about the Allies. After 2 world wars, they realized that doing good, real doing good this time, is going to involve some things that don't feel good, like making sure that all the countries that need to know that they lost will know that they lost, and they will be occupied and denazified and go through some pretty painful processes to emerge better on the other side. And this kind of determination to know that doing good in so many fields in life requires doing things that don't feel good. I think it's a muscle that became atrophied in many societies. And it's one of the things that I think we need to recoup for us in Israel and to demonstrate that to others around the world. Yes, we want to do good, but to do good will require doing some things that don't feel so good.
Thank you, Einat. Rawan?
In a second, very briefly, so that Paul has a minute. The only thing I can say, you're leading the way. Many people cannot say it openly in the Middle East, but you are the hope. They are grateful that Nasrallah is dead. They're grateful that Hani is gone. They're grateful that Khamenei is gone. I'm not talking about 100 people. I'm talking about millions in the region. So wear your Jewishness, not your Judaism necessarily. You don't have to be religious, but wear your Jewishness as a badge of honor, and the rest will follow.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rawan and Khaled and Einat. I knew this would be interesting. In all the promos, I said, oh, it's going to be a fascinating discussion. I didn't realize how both emotional and intellectually stimulating it was going to be. And I thank all three of you for your participation. Thank you all for coming. And Paul, you'll get the last word.
Ronnie, to that. Okay. Aryeh, I want to thank you not just for writing this book, although certainly for writing the book, but also for bringing together this panel, because there are no more insightful and honest observers of Palestinian society writing in English than Khaled Abu Toameh. There's no better analyst of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and where we need to go than Einat Wilf. And there's no more I think you'll agree, ladies and gentlemen, there's no more inspiring speaker for us right now than Rawan Osman. So I want to thank you, Aryeh, for bringing this remarkable panel together, for writing this book. It's on sale outside, as he said. I'm a little concerned, Einat, that you mentioned that your book is basically for free, which means there might be a stampede up the stairs to get the copies. But I want to thank this amazing panel. Thank you all for coming. Good evening. Bye-bye.